Thank you for agreeing to conduct our interview here at my home. I thought, since we were going to be talking about the importance of appearance to suffrage, that my own closet would be the best place for us to talk, and we'll be talking about what we wear and what we no longer wear as women of suffrage. As a journalist for the Indianapolis Star, I'm more familiar with being on your side of the table than on mine, but I think we'll have a good time here, and we can help people understand why we choose to dress the way that we do. But again, as a journalist, for this article, I think we really need to have some information about my background so that people who are reading the article will understand my purpose and where I'm from. My name is Grace Julian Clarke, and I was born September 11th in 1865 over in Centerville, just west of Richmond in Wayne County here in Indiana. But I spent most of my childhood in Washington City. You see, my father, George Julian, was a state representative and served in Congress there. And so, as a young person, I was in the city of Washington and learned a lot there. However, when Father's terms were over, we came back to Indiana and we moved to a wonderful community called Irvington, out on the east side of the city. I'm sure you've heard of it. And as a young child there, I went to grade school, and then I attended Butler College and graduated with a degree in philosophy in 1884, and then my master's in philosophy in 1885. And it was 2 years after that, on my birthday, September 11th, that I married my husband, Charles Clarke, who is a prominent attorney here in Irvington as well as in Indianapolis. So you probably have heard of him as well. He's a wonderful man, and he supports all of my efforts on behalf of the equality of women. And so we have quite a wonderful life together. But you asked about my clothing and why we wear what we wear, and so hence your visit here today. First, I'd like to start with what we don't wear any longer. If anything that represents constriction in our lives, in fact, Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, old fashions were designed to restrict and keep women from their freedom of movement. Nothing better illustrates this than the corset. The corset has been around for hundreds of years. But as time went on, and when I was a young woman in the 1880s, corsets got longer and longer. Previous years they were much shorter, but they got so long as to come down and over the hips. And so you could barely breathe, much less move. And it looked like we were doomed to wear corsets forever, but one of the things that happened in history was the Great War. And in the Great War, they needed steel. Now, corsets used to be made of whalebone, but once steel was discovered after the war between the states, or now you call it the Civil War, we began to wear corsets with steel in them, very tight. And they needed steel for the Great War. So women got on board to support the war effort, and we donated over 28,000 pounds of steel. They built 2 battleships with the steel from our corsets. We've never looked back, and we're not wearing corsets. We also wore a type of a chemise over the corset called a corset cover. This was often made with very thick and heavy cotton. It doesn't look very well under today's lighter fabrics that we wear. But this was something of my youth that we wore. Another thing that we don't have to wear any longer because we have a better alternative are drawers. These drawers were used for many, many years in my entire youth and as a young woman. And in the wintertime, they were made of wool and very, very uncomfortable. And as you can see, not quite so sanitary to be wearing and to use. Nowadays, women are wearing silk. And we have a wonderful chemise that we can wear under our garments. And I tend to favor the longer ones because I still wear a longer skirt. But by the way, you might notice that my skirt, for the first time in history, is above the ankle. And so that is quite a wonderful statement. They haven't been above the ankle since the Revolutionary War. It took us that long to get back to wearing shorter skirts. But I prefer this nice silk chemise to all of the heavy undergarments. And speaking of undergarments, as a young woman, we would wear many, many layers of slips, sometimes as many as 7 slips, just to stay warm in the winter, and slips out of wool. again restricting our movement and preventing us from doing things. My wedding dress in 1887 had a bustle. It was all the rage in the 70s and 80s. It really didn't do anything, but you wore it because you had to. It was what women wore at the time. Nowadays, we keep things much lighter. Speaking of much lighter, younger women today are wearing a beautiful camisole. Notice color. Now we have color available to us. During my time as a young woman, all the stockings were thick and heavy and black and just terribly uncomfortable. You rolled them down to your knees and held them up with some strict garters. Very, very uncomfortable. Today's young women wear this beautiful camisole, and they can have these wonderful short drawers made out of silk. Much cooler and much more comfortable. Additionally, nowadays we wear stockings that are silk as well, and they stay up, and we have very light garters that we wear with them with our shoes, so our shoes aren't so tight fitting. Speaking of shoes, we wore button shoes when I was a young woman. This is actually a model after 1900. I don't have any of my button shoes any longer, but this model was about after 1900. We still wore above the ankle boots at that time. Nowadays, the modern woman wears the short shoe. It's no longer a boot, and you notice we still have it very feminine. In fact, speaking of feminine, one of the things that's happened in the papers and in writers, especially when men are writing about the women's suffrage movement, they write about how masculine we are and rough women we are. And so, Susan B. Anthony said, we don't have to dress like men to be free and to be equal to them. We have the right to dress as women and still have the equality and the right to vote. So women today wear the latest styles. This is no longer, you do not have to wear a full dress. Coat dresses came in vogue during the Great War. And nowadays we still wear coat dresses, but you can wear a dickie, which is just a piece of fabric that looks like a complete shirt, and yet you can wear a coat dress and be very, very comfortable. Again, the thinner stockings and the shorter skirts make it very wonderful for us to march. But the overall image of what we have here is the white. And the reason that we wear white, again, was to offset this view of us as women trying to be men. We wanted something that unified all of us and showed the purity of our intent and our goals and our objectives. And so white is why we chose to wear this when we march or when we represent suffrage. Additionally, we always wear our sash. We chose these three colors for Votes for Women. Purple is for loyalty and fidelity, that we are committed to this and we will not give up until women have the same rights as men. The white, again, symbolizes purity, and the gold symbolizes the torch of the future of hope, that women will be treated the same as men and given the same objectives and permissions as men. We also still wear hats. This is one of the luxuries of being a woman. And broad brim hats are wonderful for when we are out marching. It would help us keep cool in the sun. And our gloves. So hats and gloves are part of what we do and a part of our fashion, but everything basically is white in what we wear. So who are the groups of women who are dressing the way we are and who are trying to advance the cause of equality and suffrage? Well, after I was married, I had a lot of time to be involved in social causes. You see, my father and my grandparents were strict abolitionists over in Centerville, and as you probably know, that was part of the Underground Railroad before and during the Civil War. I learned a lot from my father. In fact, he promoted one of the first suffrage amendments when he was in Congress, and that greatly impacted my life and what I've chosen to do. But something that was growing after the war, in popularity really, were women's clubs, where women were coming together to talk about issues that were important to them. And in 1875, a friend of mine, who's kind of like a mentor, she's about a decade older than I, May Wright Sewell, was one of the women who founded the Indianapolis Women's Club. And I thought that was so wonderful that in 1892, when I was 27, Oh, I think I have a picture of myself. I've changed a little bit since that time, but this is me when about 27 years old, about the time I was married. In 1892, I founded the Irvington Women's Club, which was on the same idea of the Indianapolis Women's Club that Mrs. Sewell was a part of. And I enjoyed it. I served as president for several years, and there were so many clubs that as I began to become more involved with suffrage, I realized we needed to unify these women together. And so I decided to create the Indiana General Federation of Women's Clubs. And that idea was to bring all the women's clubs from the state together and look at what principles that we could all agree on, even though each women's club was founded on different principles. Some of the women's were anti-smoking, some of them were anti-alcohol, some were suffragists. Many, many reasons that the women's clubs came together, but we could all come to the Indianapolis area and have a statewide meeting where we voted on leadership, and it was tremendously unifying for this city and also helping us get things rolling as far as women being organized in our state. The other thing, though, I really wanted an organization that had to do with suffrage. And so I created the Women's Franchise League. And we have been instrumental in this state for advancing women and ensuring the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which I assure you is going to get ratified this time. In fact, we believe so strongly that it will be ratified that we've discussed what's the future of our Women's Franchise League. And we've decided that after the ratification, we're going to change the name of our club to the League of Women Voters. We hope that it will have a future role in the advancement of women. Mrs. May Wright Sewell has continued on her efforts for suffrage on a national as well as a state level, and I greatly admire all of the things that she has done. We've worked very, very hard. She, through her organization meeting at the Propylaeum, and through my women's organizations out in Irvington, to make this advancement to the future and the equality of women. Thank you so much for interviewing me today. I hope that your article will help people understand about the importance of the visuals of how we represent ourselves and the importance of women's suffrage and the unity of all women for the future and the right to vote. Thank you.